from Mexico. Ambassador Reina Torres, Consul General of Mexico in Chicago. Alicia Kerber, Consul General of Mexico in Houston. Fernando González Saife, Consul of Mexico in Detroit. Maki Teramoto, Director General for Consular Protection and Strategic Planning. Everybody welcome, as well as the rest of the panelists. And I would like to ask my director, Javier Laguna, to come to the front and address you.
Buenos días, ya hicieron la presentación inicial, entonces no voy a referirme, pero no quiero dejar de mencionar el gusto que me da tener a los cónsules que nos visitan hoy, por supuesto, embajadora, siempre es un placer tenerla en casa, el cónsul de Detroit, cónsul de Houston, siempre es un gusto tenerlos, y todos ustedes los demás son bienvenidos. For those who couldn't understand me, my Spanish, just to remind you that we teach Spanish here at UNAM, so you are welcome to join us, and we have good packages for this winter. Anyways, it's a pleasure for me on behalf of my president, Dr. Enrique Graue, to welcome you. He's aware that this dialogue is taking place and UNAM is hosting part of this event. And I want to thank Ambassador Torres Mendívil for considering and always thinking of our university as a good place to start such an important event as this. For those of us who were last night at the opening event at the Elder Planetarium, it was mentioned in so many different ways the importance of this dialogue. I'm not going to summarize for you what we would hear, but the relevance of these two communities, these huge minorities, is of paramount relevance. The challenges, the historical challenges that we have faced, and what is happening at this moment as well. We heard yesterday about the COVID discrepancies and inequalities and so on. I cannot think of a better place of the university to start this. The National Autonomous University, the word autonomous has a special meaning always, has always had it. Especially in these days, autonomy is always challenged by different groups. Autonomy means that the freedom to teach, the freedom to do research, the freedom to study, and the freedom to put the ideas on the table, to communicate in an environment of respect and mutual understanding, trying to find synergies that put us together. That's what universities are for. Any university that is a university is a safe haven for discrepancies of thoughts and ideas. So the National University of Mexico here in Chicago, which is your university, is the university of all Mexicans and everyone who wants to share our values, is very, very happy and very proud to host this first day of dialogues. And I want to be brief because the dialogues are coming up, and just to welcome you again. So thank you again, Ambassador, to trust our university to begin these 2 days, and welcome you again and feel at home because this is your home. Thank you again.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today in this second day of the Black and Brown Dialogue. For this part of the program, we invited Jessica Rodriguez to share with us a song that she composed last year entitled I Can't Breathe. We met Jessica 2 years ago when her band, the Braided Janes, performed at the Mujer Migrante event. And this year, we invited Jessica to be part of a project that we have at the consulate named Mexicans in the Midwest, in which we interview people of Mexican origin with the objective to highlight and showcase the many contributions that they make every day to the US economy and society. And by the way, tomorrow we will be releasing Jessica's interview, so I invite all of you to check our social media platforms and also our YouTube page where you can find all the interviews that we have posted in past. So Jessica, first of all, could you tell us about yourself and how did you end up here in Chicago?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be a part of this and a part of this community. How I came to Chicago, well, my parents are, soy hija de padres migrantes mexicanos, so my parents migrated here in the 70s, and I was born and raised here in el barrio de La Villita, so in a little village. For those that don't know, it's like we call it like a small Mexico here in Chicago, and I had the fortune to have been raised there. Yeah, así llega aquí.
Thank you. And your band has released many albums. So what are the topics that guide your music?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. We do consider ourselves a social justice band. We feel like it's really important to share our stories, to create more representation whenever possible. And storytelling is just a beautiful part of making music and art. And a big part of our stories do touch on the issues that affect our communities of color. And a lot of these issues intersect. So we do talk a lot about gun violence. I was personally impacted by gun violence when I lost my mother in 1996. And that's something that impacts our communities a lot. We also focus on immigration reform policies. We just try to be a voice for the community whenever possible. And that's a very fundamental part of our music.
Thank you. So finally, could you tell us why did you write this song, I Can't Breathe?
Yes. When everything was happening, we were in the midst of a pandemic when, the tragedy with Mr. George Floyd happened. And I just remember watching it on the news and feeling kind of like impotent, like you can't do anything, like you're tired of seeing this. And even the reaction on the news in the beginning was too matter of fact, like everything was just, it was just a reaction to his words. And sometimes as an artist, you get imposter syndrome, or you might ask yourself, like, who am I to sing about these issues? But I think at the end of the day, we have to be a voice. So we have to create those bridges so our fellow community members know that, like, we're here for each other. These are issues that impact both of our communities. And of course, when we work together, we could be the change, and we could, just through any form, any means that we have available to us. And in our case, it's music. And so it was a reaction to the horror and atrocities that we were seeing on the news. We wrote it just a few days after it happened, and it kind of came to be, I wrote it while I was watching the news, and I kept hearing him say how he couldn't breathe and, asking for help, and that impotence is what really triggered this song.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jessie, and let's hear the song.
Thank you. I can't breathe. Somebody help me. I can't breathe. They're gonna kill me. If you are the bull, you see me in red now, you lose all control. And my people are dead now, with our fists in the air, we yell, Black Lives Matter, With your knee on his neck, your gun in her face, that life shatters. Black singing from the poplar trees. Modern day lynchings got us down on one knee, praying with our fists in the air. We yell, Black Lives Matter. With your knee on his neck, your gun in her face, that life shatters. No justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland. I can't breathe. Somebody help me. I can't breathe. They're gonna kill me. No justice, no peace, no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Jessie.
Un poco intenso, espero que hayan tomado el cafecito.
Your followers
With this song.
Because a Mexican American singing about something that is so strong and powerful for the African American community. What kind of reactions do you receive to this?
Yes. Actually, well, from in general, right? In general, I was really nervous. Like I said, like you get imposter syndrome sometimes. Like, who am I to be singing about these issues? But again, you know, when we talked about it as a band, and we felt like, you know, we were standing behind it no matter what kind of reaction we were going to get. And we had a mixed response. You know, some people in the Latino community didn't like it, and they didn't like no justice, no peace. They didn't understand what I was trying to say. And we lost followers. It's not something that, you know, social justice music is not something you're going to do for popularity, that's for sure. You're going to get a lot of people, you know, that have something to say, but we stand behind it 100%. And we did lose some followers, but what was more important to me is if just one person said, like, this song impacted me or was important to me in some way. For me, I know I'm doing my job as an artist. And I did, from the African American community, I did receive like that. Like, I had friends that reached out from like high school. One in particular, Larisha, you know, she said, oh, this song had me in tears, and she shared it, and that to me was like, wow, okay, thank you, you know, thank you so much. And she's like, keep doing what you're doing. And, you know, ironically, she was shot and killed by, I don't know, I think it was a stray bullet. She was in front of her house. My age, we went to high school together, you know, and we had just been, I'm also a small business owner, so we were talking. She was starting, she was doing like a travel, she was starting a travel agency. We were just bonding about that right before, and knowing that it touched her in that way means a lot to me, even if it was just her. There was more people than her, but just knowing that it touched her and then that impacted her life, that she was impacted that way. And, you know, she had such a senseless, you know, a tragic death. Which ties, you know, we also talk about gun violence, and so we bonded about the social justice aspect of the music, and she really enjoyed that song, and so tying it all back. Yeah, I mean, the reactions were very different, and, you know, we welcome them all those reactions.
Well, thank you so much. You're creating awareness of something that is very important in our society among all of us, and reaching out to, for our community to understand this. I really appreciate that. I think it's very brave. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Muchas gracias. Ahora sí, ahora sí.
Morning again. We certainly start with a very powerful message, and we're very grateful for that. Actually, you set the tone for the coming conversations, and I really, again, I'm thankful for that. We're going to start with a very important topic for this discussion. As it has been mentioned throughout the inauguration yesterday and this morning by the message Dr. Laguna gave us, the idea is to talk about the tough issues, to be able to discuss, you know, all the areas in which we agree, but also those areas in which we don't agree, but where we see possibilities for, you know, continue the discussion. Both communities face very similar realities, and I think historically, you know, we've been through different processes that have brought both communities where we are today, but still there is much to be done. So that's why I think this conversation is very important. As I mentioned yesterday, the idea is for us to come up with perhaps not a very ambitious plan, because this is not it. This is just a seed, as I mentioned yesterday. But yeah, certainly with some ideas, you know, good practices, things that have worked in other places and that we may want to replicate. Things that we can do from the consulate network. You know, here I'm joined, as it was mentioned, by my colleagues in Houston and Detroit, and the Director for Protection and Strategic Planning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we can contribute, we can continue this conversation. So that's the idea. So I'm delighted to start this conversation in this panel called The Fight for Civil and Social Rights, with a very important panel, I think. I have experts coming from different parts. I'm going to introduce you in general, and then I'm going to allow them to present for 5 minutes, their first thoughts on the topic that we're discussing. And to trigger the conversation, the idea is not to have a very formal panel, very scholarly, but you know, like a kind of a conversation among friends. So I welcome Isabel Rubio. She is the Chief Executive Officer at the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama. Thank you. She is joining us from Alabama, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here. Isabel, I welcome Gilda Pedraza, Executive Director and founder of Latino Community Fund. Candice Moore, of course, we heard from her yesterday, and we're happy that she's here to, you know, continue the conversation. She's the Chief Equity Officer in Chicago. And I also welcome Efren Olivares. He's the Deputy Legal Director of Immigrant Justice at the Southern Poverty Law Center. We know the Southern Poverty Law Center. I think I mentioned this to you. We're very familiar in the Consular Network because we work really closely with you. So I'm happy that you are here today. So to start the conversations, I'm going to pass the microphone to Isabel Rubio. So you can give us your first thoughts.
Gracias. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, and I'm so sorry that I'm not actually there with you. I'm also very grateful to Ambassador Javier Diaz in Atlanta for the opportunity to just be here at all. So I founded and have run the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama since 1999. We're 22 years old. And this really came out of my experience of growing up in the Deep South right after the height of the then civil rights movement in the mid-60s. And even though I am second generation Mexican American, I was racialized white for the most part because in our community and because of the way my household was structured, that's how I was racialized. When I started doing this work in 1999, it really was work that stood on the shoulders of the civil rights movement from back in the 60s, because I realized one thing, that Birmingham is has such an important role in the civil rights movement. And two, that with the welcoming or with the arriving of so many immigrants from Mexico particularly, that we needed to make sure that we created space for people to achieve their dreams and aspirations. I won't go terribly much into our organization, except to say that we are sort of a combination of Mujeres Latinas en Acción and the Resurrection Project in Chicago. So we work a lot with families, but we do educational work with students and in the community. We also have a small business program and help people become citizens and do policy advocacy as well. It's interesting at this moment that we are in, and Jessica, your music was just absolutely gorgeous and very, very moving. Thank you. I think that we are at a critical juncture in the growth and evolution of communities of color, and specifically communities, Latino communities and Black communities. We had the opportunity to be at our city council earlier this week because there was the possibility of an administrative passage of an ordinance that could be potentially harmful to Latinos. Of course, we had a contingency that was there, Latinos, but I was really surprised at the number of Black folks who came out to support us as well. And I think too often that we think in terms of either or, and I think that we have to begin to think of both and. You know, the experience of Black people in this country is vastly different than the experience of Latinos in terms of the long historical nature. But we also have a very common commonalities here that I think sometimes get overlooked when we think about the overall struggle for racial equity and social justice. I will touch more on that in just a few minutes. I've lost my time, so I don't want to go over. But anyway, I'll stop there for the moment. Thank you.
You certainly gave us some food for thought. I love the idea that it is not either or, but both and. So I'm gonna copy that and replicate it. Thank you, Isabel.
You're welcome. My
And now
pleasure.
we will hear from Gilda Pedraza. Please, Gilda, go ahead.
Gracias, embajadora. Buenos días. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Gilda Rosa Pedraza Moron, it's my name, and I come from the very deep south, from South America. And the Latino Community Fund was incorporated 5 years ago, quite frankly, out of anger and frustration, to see the Latino community in Georgia not advance progress, on the contrary. When I moved to Georgia, I was 26 years old, and the community was like this. There was a Latino-owned bank that was providing mortgages with 18 numbers so that people could realize their home, your dream to buy a home. We had a state senator, we had 30 representatives, and then HB 87 was passed in 2011, criminalizing the driving and the transportation of undocumented people, banning access to universities, access to high school, to higher education, to the same universities that then, just a few decades ago, had banned African Americans and blacks from attending. And over a period of time, all the national organizations left Georgia. LULAC, MALDEF, La Raza left. It became too difficult to work, too controversial. They left when we needed them most. So for over time, small emerging community groups incorporated to respond to the needs of a very diverse community that by that time, had become increasingly diverse, 65% Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, immigrant workers, agricultural workers, H-2A workers. And so to respond to that really increased sort of stepping up that the community itself did, is that we incorporate to be this quarterback to small grassroots nonprofit organizations, leaders that were trying to do the best they could for their own communities, to facilitate dollars and investments because there is power in money, and to be an advocate and a voice for those that, for survival and for other reasons, couldn't be here today, for example. So that's our role. We work closely with a number of multiracial and multicultural and multilingual allies organizations. In fact, we are part of a lawsuit against the state and the governor against the restriction of voting rights. Some of our plaintiffs, and SPLC is in our legal counsel, by the way, shout out to SPLC. So I can read some of the plaintiffs: the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Black Alliance for Just Immigration Reform, ARC, Southern Christian Leadership. And so we really believe, like Isabel mentioned, in really strengthening the solidarity space and look at what we can accomplish together. We would not be here, we wouldn't be able to vote, we wouldn't be able to go to college, we wouldn't be able to have language access had it not been for the leaders and the people that were part of the civil rights movement. So thank you.
Thank you, Gilda. And certainly in circumstances or in places where things are more complicated for both communities, it's more, I guess, urgent for both communities to work together. And actually, from what you're telling us, it comes naturally because of, when you're facing these tough circumstances coming from perhaps local laws and regulations, but also the atmosphere, also some communities, expressing traits of xenophobia or racism. I think that is more urgent for both communities to join and work together in these issues. So thank you for those comments, Gilda. And now I'm going to pass the microphone to Candice Moore, so you can talk us about what you're doing in Chicago, in the city of Chicago.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Good to be with you again. I'm Candice Moore. I serve as the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Chicago. And you may be wondering, how does that connect with civil rights? One of the things that I'm reminded of, or I think about as I sit on this panel, is that I started my work at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, right before I came into this role at the City of Chicago. In fact, I jokingly reminded the now mayor when I was getting interviewed, I was like, I sue government, right? So you're asking me to come into government to take on this new role and build out this new office. And she said yes. And ultimately I said yes. And why? For me, as a civil rights attorney, and in my experience of working alongside communities and trying to change systems, it grated on me the reality that, I was coming in at a moment in which harm had been produced and we were trying to seek justice for our clients, trying to fix something that was broken, trying to address 1,000, in my opinion, bad decisions, and just wondering constantly if we could have, if folks could have been in the room earlier talking about communities in a different way, thinking about our work in a different way, might we even be at this position? And if we can't get in there, if government isn't changing a massive institution that impacts all of our lives, if it's not doing its own work to think about justice, to think about equity, then we are fighting against a system that will continue to perpetuate that harm. And so I said yes to this job with this sort of hopeful vision that, not that I could solve it all, because to be quite frank, these problems have existed for centuries and decades, and no one person is going to save it. No one chief equity officer, I don't care how good they are, is going to save it. But instead to lay a foundation, to start something, to start to activate people and start to give people the space to believe that we could work differently. So I just want to take you through just quickly a couple of slides that kind of explain my version of how to lay this foundation, how we are starting this work in the city of Chicago. So much more to go. We still sit in a system that just candidly perpetuates harm. But if we don't start getting into the work of thinking about how we're going to work differently, we're never going to see anything different. So if you want to have the next slide. So I talked about this a little bit yesterday, is when I think about the role of this Office of Equity and Racial Justice, I think our job is to think about how we build equity into how we do business as a city. It is not a program, it is not an initiative that we can sort of say, it's gonna happen on this strategic plan, it'll be done in 5 years. Like, that is not how we can think about equity. We have to think about it building the muscle to continue to think about and deliver equity as a matter of results and as a matter of process in how we do business as a government. Think about all the things that government is responsible for. The job is to really think about how do we build equity, the how we do the work, and ultimately the results that we get into everything. There's no finish line. This has got to be about building a muscle. So one of the things that we did on my team is to think about, okay, what are going to be the values and principles that guide this work? Why is that so important? Because if people don't believe the same thing, no matter what I say, no matter what rules, policies we lay out, we are not going to get to the culture that maintains the problem that we deal with. And so we have to start to lay a foundation of what are the principles, what do we mean when we say equity. Equity is both an outcome and a process, and it's about fairness and justice at the end of the day. It's about making sure that we're doing our work in a fair and a just manner, and we are really thinking about how everyone can thrive, which means that we may have to do different things for different folks given the circumstances that they are in, the histories that they've experienced. We have a vision for equity. We need to see it before we get there, because ultimately we are talking about often a world that we haven't seen yet. So we need a vision to think about where we're going. So when we talk about things like diversity and engagement, diversity is a source of our power. It is not another way to say equity. It's not another way to say black and brown folks. Diversity is about different people with different experiences bringing their time, their talent, and their perspectives to the work to power the work and make it better. And to create a way for us to solve the deep challenges of our communities. Engagement has got to be how we do business. It's not the thing you do at the end of a project. It's got to be, I fundamentally believe that the people who are experiencing the problem are key and are experts to solving that problem. our partnerships have to lead to transformation. That's how we should be thinking about this. Our partnerships should be doing something different for us. We are healers. This work is about healing fundamentally, and our prosperity needs to look like our city. We need to be able to look at our successes and ask where do Black, brown people see this success? Not just an overall number, but are we all moving forward? And then some guiding principles that strengthen our work. And I'm going to speed through this because I know I'm probably tight on time. I always have more slides than time allows. So just guiding principles to move our work forward. So one of the things, and I'm glad that we've gotten the chance to partner here around Together We Heal, is my team has been thinking about the importance of healing in this change work. And healing sometimes feels like a sort of a squishy concept for government folks, right? What do you mean, Candace, you want me to do healing work? I am over the water department. You know, my job is to do water. And I say, no, healing is still your job, right? And we're starting to build, and when I get really excited about where this Black and Brown dialogue will go, is we are trying to think about what are the tools and the practices that we need to think about around healing. So community is doing the work, right? They are building the relationships and the organizing on the ground. How is government going to engage with that? What is our role? Should we step up or should we step back, right? And so really thinking about and building partnerships with our community to support that work. We need new tools and new partnerships to do this work. Our old tools and our old partnerships will not get us there, right? If we have a new vision, we are talking fundamentally about trying new things. So what different ways are we going to work? What different strategies can we apply that we can build into the how we do business to have different results? And then we are talking about institutional transformation. We are thinking about systems. We are thinking about people in order to drive that work. I'm actually going to pause here for time's sake, but I just wanted to share that this is one way that me and my team are trying to think about how do you start a change process in an institution at the same time that communities continue to press us, rightly so, for the harm that these systems are moving with or without intent, right? And that's a fundamental thing to understand about government, is that it is a system. There are 1,000, there's over 30,000 employees that work for the city of Chicago, just the city of Chicago. That doesn't include the school district, the park district, the housing authority, right? So we're talking about a massive bureaucracy. And that has been moving in ways, that has been designed in certain ways that have resulted in exactly what we are seeing in our communities. It have resulted in our producing the results that we see for our communities. If we are going to change that, we have got to have an inside-outside game. We have got to be pushing on the outside, but we also have to be building on the inside, and we have to think about where the fight is and where the building work is and how they come together to ultimately produce that transformation.
Thank you so much, Candace. And I really think that sometimes we lose perspective of things throughout history. The fact that Chicago has an officer in your position, I think, is the result of many things had to happen before this. And those things come, from centuries, but very specifically for the fight that many people gave in the 60s and 70s precisely to make sure that that's not only a demonstration or a call for justice, but that permeates and goes through the institutions. So I think that we need to keep that in mind and make sure that all institutions have that perspective. I think that what we've been witnessing recently is precisely that. So thank you again, Candace, for that comment that you made. Efren, now I'm going to pass the microphone to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, and a tough act to follow after Ms. Moore, but I'll give it my best. I'm the Deputy Legal Director for Immigrant Justice at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I'm also an immigrant myself. I came to the United States when I was a teenager. I'm from a small town in the state of Nuevo León, in northeastern Mexico, Allende, Nuevo León, tierra de valientes marineros. And today I have the privilege of representing and advocating on behalf of immigrants in the South primarily, but all across the United States. And in preparation for this call, when we met with the ambassador, we were discussing where are the overlaps, the areas of overlaps for the black and brown communities in the civil rights space, and in my case, thinking particularly of the immigrants' rights space. And one thing that I would like to highlight is that the conversation in which this dialogue is taking place, right, a year after the reckoning with racism in the United States, after the events of last summer and everything that led up to that, I don't think that is happening in a vacuum. It came on the heels of at least 4 years of the prior administration hammering hateful rhetoric against anybody who is not white. Anti-Muslim, anti-black, anti-Mexican. You heard that every single day from those press conferences for 4 years. And it was in that context that we had this reckoning with racism. I don't like saying racial reckoning because it's reckoning with racism, which is different. And in the immigration space, I think where the key overlap is in understanding the history of immigration laws and policies in this country. You hear day after day, week after week from the anti-immigrant corners or mainstream, I suppose, these days, that the reasons is that they come to take our jobs. We cannot take so many immigrants. They come to take our jobs. They increase crime rates. It's a national security issue. Those arguments have been repeated time and again for over 150 years in this country, and it's never about that. It's about keeping this country as white as possible. It's about perpetuating this false idea that the United States is a white country. And that is the vision, very unapologetically, of many people, including the previous president of this country. But if we understand that, and we think of our fight for civil rights for immigrants, understanding that it is a fight against white supremacy in this country, we will identify the areas of overlap for black, brown, and all other communities that are not white. I want to be very respectful and acknowledge that I don't purport to speak on behalf of black immigrants. I am an immigrant myself and know what it is like to move to another country where you don't speak the language, where you don't know the culture. But it is a very and vastly different experience to be a black immigrant in this country. Anti-blackness shows up in every aspect of our immigration system. Black immigrants are more likely to be detained, less likely to receive asylum, most likely to be the victims of abuse while in immigration detention, less likely to receive the benefits of any immigration relief. And sadly, and I think this is an important point that is important to acknowledge, is that anti-blackness oftentimes also shows up in our own immigrant community. Other immigrants, oftentimes, and I am not accepting myself, we're all the result of the biases of the society in which we have been reared, express anti-blackness. So I think it's an important point to acknowledge it. And therein, to Candace's point that this is something that has been, I'm sorry, Ms. Moore's point, that has been built up for decades and centuries and permeates every aspect of our society and our institutions and our laws, frankly. Up until 1952, we still had it in the laws of the United States that citizenship was available to every white person. Since 1790, up until less than 70 years ago, that was still in the books. So it's in every aspect of our society, and we need to confront that in order to acknowledge that the fight here is the fight for a true multiracial democracy. That's not what we have in this country. We don't have that yet. We're working to build it. I hope we get to build it in our lifetime, but we may not. And to paraphrase John Lewis, it's not about getting there, but it's about passing the ball, getting better, and passing on the fight to the next generation, because justice is an act. It's a process, and I'm proud to keep doing that fight. And I think one important piece of this is also understanding the vision, right? We're trying to build a more just, fair, humane immigration system. But to me, the ultimate end game is to have a society in which there's no discrimination on the basis of immigration status. It's that simple. And it's challenging because discrimination on the basis of immigration status is built into our laws, is built into our Constitution, it's legal in many places. But if we truly believe in human rights, that every human being has certain rights by virtue simply of being a human being. Where you were born shouldn't matter. What your immigration status is shouldn't matter, or it shouldn't matter that much. I'm under no illusion that that is something that, again, that we can achieve in the next year or 5 years or even 10 years. But that's what we're fighting for. And again, in the spirit of finding common ground with our Black brothers and sisters, I think it's key to understand that this has been the result of more than 2 centuries of a society built on the premise that on the one hand, only free white people get citizenship as the initial laws of the United States dictated. And on the other hand, we try to promote this myth that the United States is a nation of immigrants. You hear that still. You hear that still, pero solo cuando les conviene. When it's about rebuilding about a hurricane, when it is about detasseling our cornfields, then yes, we're a nation of immigrants and we're essential workers. But when it comes to being our permanent neighbors, to having the same rights and benefits and obligations of citizenship, that is not the case. So I think that's, I don't mean to end on such a not hopeful message, but I think it's important to face what we have in front of us and how high and steep the mountain is that we're trying to climb. But I'm convinced that having that understanding will find those areas of overlap so that we can do better, not only for immigrants, but for every person of color in this country.
Wow, thank you so much, Efrain. You reminded us of a lot of very important things. And of course, the intersection of what our community lives, our undocumented community lives in this country, and how it ties really closely with the issue that we're discussing here today. So thank you for saying that, and also for reminding us that many of our immigrants and our community here of Mexican origin are also Afro-descendants. So it's, you know, one thing, one layer on top of another in terms of what the challenges they're facing. I had some questions planned, but just occurred to me that I have 3 very powerful women in the panel. And I wanted to ask, how do you see related what we have seen in recent years regarding the movement of women and the Me Too movement with what we're discussing here today, with the fight for civil and social rights among the Black brown communities? Is there an intersection there? Are those movements, social movements, are at some point talking to each other? Is there a way in which this can be part of something bigger? So who wants to take that first? I'm going to let you think for a couple of minutes, but then I'm going to pass perhaps the microphone to, okay.
An example.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. I think the answer is yes. I mean, intersectionality is our lives, right? It's how we live. It's not me if I'm not a woman, an immigrant, right? A mom, the director of an organization, an English learner, a cisgender woman, etc. So I think yes. I would like to give an example, particularly in Georgia. I don't know if you have heard, but in Georgia we have several for-profit detention centers. Several of them are, of course, an agreement with ICE. And recently, well, not recently, there was a recent complaint that came after years of investigation of abuse of detained women that were actually going through surgical procedures without consent. The person that complained, that bear the flag for justice, that was suffering from all of these, life threats and everything, was a Black woman, correctional officer that saw what was happened and said, this is not right, and I need to stand for other women, right? The majority of the women that were affected were Black immigrants, to Efrain's point, and a few Latinx immigrants, too. And so I want to give an example, because this is one of the ways where it actually, how it looks like in community. And there is, of course, a complaint that continues, but it is hand-on-hand Black women that have been leading and using their bodies to defend and support other Black women and brown women in detention that couldn't couldn't speak. The other example is Feminist Women's Health Center. I know this because I used to be the chair of the organization. It's the only comprehensive healthcare clinic in Georgia, led by a Black woman, of course, the fantastic Kwajalein Jackson. They are the leading organization providing reproductive education and healthcare for immigrant women on a sliding scale. That is a premier organization, and they have a project which is called Lifting Latinx Voices, completely run by Latinas, operated by Latinas to provide education and services for Latinas. So those are two examples in which that can be seen.
Candace, yeah.
As I think through that question, the thought that's boiling up for me is how when we introduce intersectionality, when we work across our racial groups, how it deepens our movement and how it reminds us that this isn't about necessarily perfect people, but we all have got to do the work and build the muscle for thinking about oppression, for thinking about equity, and recognizing that all of us have been socialized in a way that creates blind spots around our particular experience, and that we all have to be prepared to confront ways in which, when we are not paying attention, we could be perpetuating some of the same problems. And I think about, movements of the past. Oftentimes, I think there's a danger in romanticizing them fully and not coming with a critical lens. But it also doesn't mean, in my opinion, that you throw it all away. There are lessons to be learned. There were imperfect people that were our heroes, right? What we ought to do is analyze those things and ask ourselves, what are the values and principles that are important as we move forward? What are we going to do today that's differently? And I think, as we think about the intersectionality of race and gender, there have been movements that, although powerful, have forgotten the role of women, have not put women reminded people of the leadership and the importance and the base building that they've done in that work, have not called out the specific experiences you have as a minority woman that may be different from the overall experience of being, whether it be Black or brown, right? And if we can't have those conversations, if we say one has to be in front of the other, you wait while this moves, then I think we lose something. And so as I think about this question, it's just a reminder to all of us that however powerful, however steadfast we are in our work, we are all fallible. And that we have to be building that muscle, that rigor, that analysis that allows us to be called out and to embrace that and to learn from it and grow from it, and recognizing that there are no perfect people on this journey, but what makes the difference is our ability to continue to learn, to adapt, to make a bigger tent, and to create more space and more inclusion, so that we can build the bigger muscle that's going to be needed in order to seek a massive cultural and institutional change that we so desperately desire.
Thank you, Candace. Go ahead, Isabel.
No, I just wanted to say I couldn't agree more with what both you ladies have shared. When I think about what that looks like in Alabama, we have a recently formed C3 table in the state, and that bringing ethnicities, sexual orientation, all of this. And so we are seeing how this opportunity is giving us the chance to really do this work in an intersectional kind of way in the state of Alabama. It's still very nascent. And listen, in Alabama, we're behind Georgia for sure. And our immigration law in 2011 was the worst, and thanks to SPLC for helping us with that. But we've got a long way to go. But I think that you can't discount all of the efforts that are happening on the ground everywhere. And that's really, as we think about this work, is making sure that we're empowering people from all backgrounds to join together. And I love what you said about it's not easy is not easy, but when you create a tent that's big enough and work really hard on building trust, I mean, I have a lot of hope in what we can accomplish.
Thank you, Isabel. Efren, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, it's because we're a majority in this panel, so. Thank you. I have another question for the panel. How do we think of this in terms of generations? I mean, we've been listening since yesterday to the young voices of, our communities. I was discussing with my colleagues, I feel okay. I'm, at my age, I think that we can be hopeful of the future. Of course, when we listen to them, the energy, the passion that they put into this conversation, I think it's amazing. So that muscle is being built, and the torch is going to be passed to a better prepared group of persons in our communities. But do you see differences in what, the powerful voices that were fighting in the 60s and the 70s and even before for civil and social rights? How are those compared to these young voices? What will be the main difference? Is there any new, is another contribution in terms of the issues or perhaps the strategy? How do you see that difference between both generations? My friend, do you want to start?
Sure, I can try. From my perspective, the demographic changes that continue to happen in this country will definitely have an impact in how political power is shared and exercised in this country. But there is a risk that a lot of that power is going to be silenced or weakened, and we see across the South in particular, but many other parts of the country, efforts to suppress voting rights, to draw congressional maps that dilute the power of certain voices. So I think because of that reckoning, it's more important than ever that this struggle to protect the right of every person to have a meaningful vote, a vote that counts and that is not diluted in the process is super important. In the way that the generational piece in particular in the immigrants' rights context, this notion that, well, they broke the law, which is an often repeated point. I don't hear that from the younger supporters, from the younger generations, because I feel like in the world where we have lived in for the last decade and a half, and will become even more so, of super spread information and connectivity, that notion of where somebody is from seems to lose significance. On the cultural side. On the legal side, is still very important. I mean, whether you have that document, that ID to show or not, really impacts the opportunities you get to have. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and I do think the younger generations have a more metropolitan view of citizenship and rights. So I am very hopeful for the future.
Candace, do you have any thoughts of this generational issue?
I do. I was thinking about how I think one of the beauties of younger generations kind of throughout time is the way they can push us to reimagine what exists, right? So often young people can ask the threshold question that so many of us are afraid to ask. Why are you doing that? Does it have to be that way, right? And when I see young people coming and organizing and reimagining systems and pushing for many of us to rethink the patterns and the institutions and the barriers that we are operating under, that we are taking for granted. I think throughout time you see that. One of the things, though, I think is important for us to remember is that, and I see a lot of different groups come to being in government, being in a mayor's office, have a lot of groups coming to you. Some things that I become slightly worried about is how older groups or more established groups separate themselves from young people. I think the strength is in the connection. I think there is strength in the wisdom and the lessons learned of those who have been here before, working in partnership with young people. And this is often a very hard thing to achieve because there's always this inherent, a sort of culture around generations coming together. Respect your elders, which is important, but also how can our elders invest in our young people and support their leadership so that they can really take on the torch after, right? Like there's this question we need to be asking ourselves. And I think it does a disservice to young people when some of the folks who have been here before, who have gone through some of the struggles and have learned things, don't give that back to our young people. And don't prepare them so that they can really not have to reinvent the wheel, but also for them to understand it and recognize that they may want to reimagine it, right? And so it is this push and pull. And I think that exists within our institutions as people who are coming into institutions have a different orientation around some of the harms that government has created, some of our responsibilities, and that meets folks who have been in institutions, and sadly, I see this in government a lot, people who have kind of had that maybe like beaten out of them a little bit, right? Like they've lost some of their hope, right? Because they've recognized that the system is so hard to change, and they resolve to, this is my part, I'm just gonna focus here. And so there is this necessary push and pull between generations. Every generation goes through it. We are no different there. But I do think that there is so much that our young people that if we embrace it, they can push us and allow us to grow and get much further in our work. And at the same time, we owe it to them. We owe it to them to invest right back into them so that they are prepared and they are ready to carry the work forward.
Thank you. Candace, Isabel, Gilda, do you have any thoughts of this?
I have some thoughts. So for Georgia, it's interesting because it is estimated that probably 2/3 of our Latino community in Georgia live in mixed status households. And so we have these incredible number of young people that have grown knowing what it is not to have a voice, right? That they have suffered in their bodies, in their minds, in their lives. What is it to be subject to those laws and to the government that they had, but the parents had no way of determining them, and having a vote. So there is incredible passion for using that power. And you can see that in the recent elections, not this one's for the mayoral, because we don't know the turnout, but it wasn't that good. But in the last election for runoff, the Senate, for presidential election, the turnout was historical. And 70% of people that voted early were people under 40, and had not participated in the previous election before. When you look at the number, the percentage of new voters in Georgia since 2016, the vast majority, I'm talking about 70%, are communities of color. Black 25%, Latino 18%, Asian 12%. Right? So we have these, incredible opportunity, understanding, of course, that demographics do not define the future, because there is something called political education, right? Which I did not have when I came to this country, and it has taken me, 20 years to start learning, and I'm still learning. But for folks, and 90% of Latinos in Georgia, young Latinos are American citizens, that they grow up seeing their parents fight for the rights, seeing lawsuits, seeing that, all the tools in the toolkits are available for them to ensure that their rights are protected, and that they have a responsibility to protect each other, because that's what we do in community, that's what we do, right, when we feel like we belong, keeps me very inspired and motivated.
Isabel?
I'll just be brief and say that I have a daughter who's just turning 25 tomorrow. And to see how she has been moved by the events of the past several years, beginning with the last election, I suppose in 16, really gives me hope for what we have to look forward to in terms of just the outrage that our young folks have and their interest in being part of change. And so I think that that gives me hope for what's to come.
We tend to forget, right? It happens to us adults or, I'm not going to put an age in that, but more experienced person. But we tend to forget. And actually, yesterday, Chuy Garcia reminded us of a time in Chicago where both communities joined to elect a mayor. And for some reason, and I think it's worth reflecting into this, what happened in between that separated both communities, that created or emphasized or reinforced that sense of separation? When actually, they have demonstrated throughout history that they can have pretty remarkable successes when they join forces. So certainly, it's worth thinking about this and reflecting on this and see how this, what we've been saying in last year and this year, has kind of reignited the push for the fight of civil and social rights in our community. So I certainly think that we're living in very exciting times, and we can be very excited about the future, listening to those young voices. Before I open, the microphone for the public, for the audience to ask and comment on what our panelists have mentioned, I want to thank everyone that is following this panel on our social media. So thank you. You know how it works. I mean, if you have a comment or have a question, just write it down in the chat area for our Facebook page. We are streaming this in our Facebook platform, the Consul Next Chicago, but also at the Cesar Chavez Institute platform. And it's going to stay there. So even if this event is over, you can still watch the videos and comment on those, and we will make sure that we'll pass that information to our panelists in case you have questions or comments for them. And the other thing is I'm going to ask my colleagues to put up there the bios of our panelists so people can know and learn what they are doing and the organizations that they're representing here today. So now I'm going to open the microphone for comments from the public. So anyone who wants to start the conversation? We have coffee in the back, so in case it's caffeine is the reason. Go ahead, Fernando.
Good morning and congratulations for this excellent panel. And I just want to mention that I love that in this panel you're here, Candice, representing government. And in that sense, I was thinking, how can you bring more allies and more partners to the table? And of course, I was thinking the very important aspect of schools, universities. Then I was thinking, how do we bring the media? Let's talk about it. Media is so important nowadays. And finally, how to bring in this conversation the international experience regarding the fight for civil and rights. And the second aspect is how to bring this message to forums in which people do not think like us, because sometimes I think that we're preaching to the choir. We all agree in every single of the comments, but how do you do that? And that's why I think that the aspect of bringing this message, especially to younger generations, it's so important, because changing perspectives, even from adolescents sometimes, is very, very hard. But starting from the beginning and taking this message to the areas in which there is a commonality of thought, that's one of the biggest challenges. Thank you.
So you want to react to that, Candace?
Yeah, a few different thoughts. So on the question of allies and thinking about how do you kind of move the work, sometimes this is my opinion. So sometimes I see people find the hardest person and they spend all of their energy trying to change them, right? Or they're trying to get to 100% of everyone kind of in alignment before they can move. And my thought is based off of what I've seen, how things change and how I've seen movements, you never get to 100%. And in fact, a lot of times we spend a whole lot of time on the people that are hardest to move, and missing our ability and to invest in people that actually aren't that far from us. They're not with us yet, right? Maybe because they don't know how, or they don't have an avenue, they haven't been activated. But all the while we're kind of going in and going very hard on this person that has, line in the sand, I'm never moving. We're kind of missing maybe the 10 people who would go with us with a little bit of work. And so I think sometimes we have to just be strategic in our work. Who's with us? Who are already the people that I know if I look to them, they're going to be on the same page? Are they empowered? Are they activated? Because this can't just be about me. This has got to be about us. And I think we fall sometimes into a danger of thinking that there's a hero that we all have to follow instead of activating multiple people who can be leaders in this work. And then how do we collectively go get our people? How do we go get our people by aligning on our values and principles and our shared history? It may be different in some cases, but I'd argue that the values and principles that undergird justice work can be universal and can connect people. Often, though, we need to understand one another's histories so that we can be able to speak to that, to be open to say, the struggle you're talking about connects a whole lot to the struggle I'm talking about. And I think if we go in at it together, we can actually create a win for both of our communities. And so I think there's this very tactical aspect of it. The last thing I want to say is, I think we sometimes forget that people don't just get born woke, right? Like there is learning that needs to happen. It is worthy to invest in teaching people, to taking the time. When I think about the work that I have to do in government, right, I don't get the benefit of just saying, I'm gonna throw everyone out and we're gonna start new, right? That's not how this works. There's an institution, and people are experts at their jobs. I don't know how to run a fire department, nor am I trying to. But I want the person who knows how to do that to also know what I'm talking about when I say equity, when I say justice, when I say fairness, and to see that as part of their job. That means I got to invest in them. I got to build the spaces where we can learn, where it's okay to have the conversation. And sometimes they're hard conversations. Now, some things I can do, some things I can't do, right? And so I think we need to, as folks who want to see this work grow, we all have a role, we all have networks, we all have those sort of shared connections. We need to be strategic in thinking about how we build together to get to movement.
Thank you, Candace. Efrain, any thoughts and questions?
I think I agree with everything that Candace said, and in particular, on the question of values, I think that is one way that we bring over to, we activate. It's, in my opinion, it's not always about convincing somebody of what you're trying to do, it's to activate them. People may share these values, but maybe are not aware of where the fight needs to happen or what. Coming out to vote is the easiest example, right? Apathy. People might agree, but it's not that important to them personally. So in my opinion, it's a lot about activating based on values and principles. I think that's much easier and much more effective because it goes to people's identity and beliefs in what is right in the world, rather than a specific policy or ordinance. So to me, that's what I try to come back to, which is the values point.
Isabel, Gilda, anything to add? I was just thinking, Fernando, when you were asking this, there's a lot of work that we need to do at the consulates. As part of our work, as I mentioned yesterday, our consular diplomacy calls for a lot of action with, any potential partner in the empowerment or defense or assertion of the rights of our community here in the U.S. And this is an issue that we very rarely speak about. We carry a lot of things when we come to this country, or when our community comes to this country, in terms of racism and xenophobia and all those issues. But we don't talk about those. So I think that for us, on our part, how do we engage our community into this conversation is very important. I think it's a good opportunity what is happening in this debate that is taking place at a national level here in the U.S. it's important for us to put a mirror in front of us and actually see those things that we haven't been discussing in the past, but that are important. So it's also time for us to make this conversation part of our daily work. And I think that's precisely the purpose of this event and why we're reaching out from different consulates and different offices in the Mexican government to engage and to be part of this conversation. I don't know, you guys, Alicia and Fernando, how many times you've heard comments coming from our community that actually, surprise us because they show the lack of awareness. And as you mentioned, not everybody wakes up, knowing. So part of our duty is precisely that, to talk about it, to open up the doors.
I had one question that kind of came up from yesterday. So I forget who, they were mentioning how during the sort of American, Underground Railroad, American slaves, some went north, but also some went south. Yeah, yeah. To be honest, I never thought about that, right? And I actually don't know much about that history. I think it would be fascinating. I'm just up here sharing my thoughts and opinions. It would be fascinating to learn that and talk about that. What happened? What did that look like? It is important that these kind of narratives are lifted up because I imagine that a lot of people don't know about that experience, and that could be a really powerful way for us to learn together and think about what is our shared history.
Absolutely, Dr. Laguna, there's a topic for for Chicago.
Sign me up. I'm there.
Absolutely. Thank you. So is there any other question or comment? Yes, please.
Good morning, and arriba el norte. I'm from Nuevo León too. Based on what you've been discussing, I also listen that it's very important to bring the transnational view of scope of these dialogues. We have learned with the pandemic that the frontiers have erased, and we're in more communications with some other countries. Immigration also, it's now happening a lot in Mexico with all the caravans coming through from all of these different countries. So what will be some of your suggestions or some of your ideas to start these conversations with this transnational perspective?
Thank you, Kari. Comments on that?
Sure, I can try. In 2018 and 2019, with the policy of Remain in Mexico that you all may have heard about, which called and still does to some extent, I don't mean to get into the technicalities of where the policy is, but it mandated that people applying for asylum in the US at the southern border needed to wait for their hearing on the Mexican side. And we as advocates, I was working at the border at the time, and we were outraged. There was a makeshift refugee camps in Matamoros, in Reynosa, Nuevo Laredo, almost every city on the Mexican side of the border. We were calling for a UN to investigate and treat this as a refugee crisis, etc. And then in the city of Matamoros, there was a protest that was organized against the American consulate in Matamoros, which is right south from Brownsville, Texas. And initially, we were very excited. It's like, all right, the local residents of Matamoros are joining the fight. They're also protesting against this policy. To our huge disappointment, the reason for the protest that they were putting together was that they didn't want the immigrants in Matamoros either. It was not, the immigrants were largely Central American, mostly from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. It was an anti-immigrant protest, as we sadly found out. So I think that it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the shared values that we are often failing to communicate, right? I think we often complain, I as a Mexican national and a Mexican immigrant spend most of my days complaining about the mistreatment of immigrants in this country, but often am recalled to the mistreatment of non-Mexican immigrants in Mexico, right? So it's a very, to me, it's a complex issue, and I am by no means an expert on it, but it just calls to, it reminds us that it's, as you were saying, a transnational issue. And I go back, my value is human rights. Trying to remind ourselves that if we are serious about human rights, if that is what we're calling for, I don't care if it's the Rio Bravo or the Suichate, it's the same issue, and people are aspiring. Human beings have been moving across the earth in search of two things throughout our history as a species. Either fleeing persecution and violence and wars, or in search of opportunity. Either work or a more fertile land or a river or something. And we have done that for millennia, and we will always continue to do that, no matter what policies are put in place and what walls are built or not built. We will always, that would always happen. And in my opinion, it's about to get worse with climate change. We're about to start seeing more and more climate refugees. So it's going to get worse. We are living with policies and laws that are, in my opinion, are outdated for the geopolitical reality we're living today. And it's a tall order, but I think if we can agree that, on human rights, we are a good way of the way there.
Thank you, Efren. And now I'm going to ask my panelists to give us some final remarks, but I would like you to focus on the future, on what we can expect or what we can build, and how can we keep building that muscle that Candace mentioned here. And we've been talking a lot about the role of the youth in this task, but what us adults can we also do for the fight of civil and social rights in the future of these movements that we are seeing today. So I'm going to start in the same order that as we began this panel. Isabel, can you give us your thoughts on the future of the fight for social and civil rights?
Thank you. Yes. I do feel like that we are at a pivot point with everything that happened in 2020 with just the series of heinous murders of people. And I think that, I don't know. I wonder sometimes, I understand the importance and significance of Black Lives Matter. It's truly, truly important. But do we also leave people out when we do that? And so I think that one thing we have to do going forward is sort of reconcile that, because I understand that if Black lives don't matter, no other lives matter. But in some ways, I feel like that pits us against ourselves. So I think that that's something that we have really got to work out to build a real strong multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition that just won't tolerate any of this. As we have the opportunity to build a better nation that we envision.
Thank you, Isabel. Gilda?
Was really thinking that every single successful movement in what I know of history has been led by youth. When we think about the civil rights movement, right, people in their 20s, students, right? When we think about Tiananmen Square, young people, students. When we think about, women's rights, young women. And so make space, right? Facilitate leadership from youth for us to follow. They have the time, they have the passion, but also what's our role? Share our stories, share our pain, share the good and the bad. We have all been raised in white supremacy systems, right? There is huge colorism, anti-Blackness in the Latino community. Very few people know. I only learned that last year that 25% of all Latinos in Latino America are Black, right? Look around and let's see how many people are leading organizations, for the Latino community that are Black. Are we blocking ourselves, our own communities, right? What's our role there? And so, share that too, so that kids understand and learn the good and the bad. And also, that we need to continue to support each other in our fights and in our struggles, right, across communities of color, you know, particularly the Black community. But also let's celebrate our wins. Sometimes we forget, you know, to celebrate, to share our wins. And then let's redefine how those wins look like for different spaces. A win in New York is going to be completely different for a win in Georgia. During the last election, there were 3 huge counties that for the first time in history got their first Black sheriffs: Gwinnett, Cobb, and Henry County. Gwinnett County was responsible for 25% of all ICE interactions across the country. The first thing the Black sheriff did, got rid of 287G. He upheld his promise to support communities of color because he knew that it was together, right, that we are able to win. So those are wins that sometimes, you know, get eclipsed, don't get enough attention because, you know, everybody talks about presidential election, the senators, but at the local level, those are the wins that really impact people, and we need to continue to celebrate and reminding ourselves of that and telling those stories so that children and youth understand that there are wins, but the wins are wins because we work together.
Thank you, Gilda. Candace.
I want to second this idea that I believe we're at an inflection point. We've all had this massive shared experience in the form of a global pandemic. It has shifted our lives, it has made us uncomfortable, and it has laid bare many of the fundamental inequities that we've known have been there, but they are visible. They are visible in the COVID deaths that we've seen, the infection rates, in the economic impacts that we've seen. They are visible. The case is really powerful. My fear is that there is also a conserving energy that wants to recover and just return back to normal. And I think if we don't reclaim this moment, if we don't use it as an opportunity to get clear about our values and principles and use the momentum behind recovery to also drive transformation, for us to create new things, to bring our young people into the fold so that they can help us reimagine what is possible in our policies and our practices, then we will have lost an important moment. I think this is a time for our generation to really think about what we can be doing differently, to build more people into our tent, and to recognize that we have this opportunity. I am incredibly hopeful. I'm very tired because I feel like I'm trying to do everything that I can do. But at the same time, the point is still true that this can't just be about a chief equity officer, a city of Chicago, a country alone, right? It really, we have to be willing to build that alignment across all of us to get to if we want to see this moment for transformation actually come to fruition.
Thank you, Candace. And for your final thoughts.
Thank you. No pressure. Well, what I want to raise as and to get you all thinking about the future and the fight for civil rights for Black and brown people is, I think this discussion has demonstrated that there's a lot of alignment and shared values and shared hopes and struggles. But one thing that I think will be is unprecedented and will continue to be is how that fight plays out in the digital space. We had this conversation today, and in parallel, a lot of us are on the phone. So there's a conversation happening here, and there's a parallel conversation happening digitally, and you don't know who's behind that screen or that phone or that account, and who's funding and what algorithm they are pushing. That is a nut that I think as a society we haven't cracked, and it will pose a tremendous threat and a tremendous opportunity. Time will tell where we come out, but I hope that values, going back to the point of values, that those continue to be central and dictate the outcome of that. But that one is a complicated one that I don't think anyone has answers yet.
No, so you're living as a friend with A scary thought.
Sorry.
Thank you for that. So thank you, everyone. This has been a really fascinating conversation that we hope we can continue, at other time, in other spaces, including digitally, because we can do this also. We can contribute in putting something positive out there. So thank you again. Thank you for all the community that is following us in our social media. We're going to take a break, a 10-minute break, and after that, Sandra Davila is going to be here with us to talk about precisely what she's doing in the neighborhoods in, this as part of this effort that we have been talking about all day. So thank you.